If you've ever stared at some JavaScript and thought, wait, why is this a let? And that one's a const, and what's the deal with var anyway? Then you are in exactly the right place. It feels like a tiny detail, but picking the right one is one of those fundamental skills that separates confusing, buggy code from code that's clean, modern, and just works. So let's dive in.
So let's get right to it. Does this choice really matter? Oh yeah, it absolutely does. We're talking about the difference between a bug that makes you want to tear your hair out for an entire afternoon and code that's predictable, safe, and easy to understand. Trust me, it's a way bigger deal than you might think.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to take a little trip back in time to meet the original keyword, var, and get to know its weird quirks. Then we'll meet the modern heroes, let and const. We'll put them all head-to-head in a final showdown, and then I'll leave you with a simple, golden rule that will make your life as a developer so much easier.
To really appreciate why let and const were such game changers, we have to start at the beginning. We've got to talk about var. For a long time, this was the only way to declare a variable in JavaScript. But it comes with some, let's call them interesting behaviors that can lead to some really baffling bugs.
Okay, so there are two big things you need to wrap your head around with var. First is its scope. A var variable doesn't really care about things like if statements or for loops. It's either available to the entire function or it's just global. It's kind of leaky. And second, there's this really weird concept called hoisting. It sounds complicated, but an example will make it perfectly clear. All right, take a look at this. We are logging the variable a before we've even declared it. Now, in just about any other programming language, your brain is probably screaming, that's an error. It should just crash, right? But JavaScript, well, JavaScript has other plans. So what do you think? Is this going to crash and burn with a big red error message, or does JavaScript have a little surprise up its sleeve for us?
And the answer is undefined. How bizarre is that? It doesn't throw an error. It doesn't give you the number 10. It just says, hey, I know this thing exists, but it doesn't have a value yet. This isn't a bug, you guys. It's a feature, and it's called hoisting, and it is a classic source of confusion. So here's what's actually going on behind the curtain. Before your code even runs, the JavaScript engine takes a quick look through and hoists or lifts all the var declarations right to the top of their scope. But, and this is the critical part, it only lifts the declaration, the var a part. The assignment, the equals 10 part, stays right where it is. So when our console.log runs, a exists, but it's empty, and that's why we get undefined. So as you can imagine, developers got pretty tired of these weird hoisting headaches. And so in a newer version of JavaScript, we were given let. Its whole reason for being was to make variables behave in a more predictable way. And it did this with one simple, powerful idea: block scope. Here's the best way to think about it. var is like a ghost. It can pass right through the walls of if blocks and for loops. Let, on the other hand, respects walls. Those curly braces are like a locked room. If you declare a let variable inside them, it's trapped. As soon as the code leaves that block, poof, the variable is gone. It's just so much cleaner. Now you might be wondering, okay, so does the let get hoisted too? And the answer is kinda, but in a much smarter way. It creates something called the temporal dead zone. It's a really fancy name for a simple idea. JavaScript knows the let variable exists, but it basically puts up a force field around it. You are not allowed to access it until you reach the line where it's actually declared. And if you try, you don't get a confusing undefined. You get a loud, clear reference error. It's a fantastic safety feature. And that brings us to our third and final keyword, const. Now, const is a very close cousin to let. It shares a lot of the same behaviors, but it has one big, non-negotiable rule. You use it for values that should never, ever change. It's like making a promise that this variable will be constant. So just like let, const is block scoped. The main rules are simple. You cannot reassign it later, and you have to give it a value the moment you create it. But, and this is a huge but, there's a really important catch when you're working with objects and arrays. Let's take a look. Check this out. We have a user object declared with const. But look, we can totally change the properties inside that object. Changing the name from Alice to Bob is perfectly fine. What you can't do is try to assign the user variable to a completely different new object. So think of it this way. Const locks the variable's assignment, but it doesn't lock the contents of the object it's pointing to. Okay, I know that was a lot to take in, so let's hit pause and put everything side by side in a simple showdown. This is basically the ultimate cheat sheet for var, lent, and const.
You can see it all laid out here. For scope, var is the weird one with its function-wide scope, while let and const behave predictably inside their blocks. When it comes to reassignment, that's where const stands alone. It's a one-time deal. And that hoisting behavior? That's the difference between getting a helpful error with let and const versus that sneaky, confusing undefined from var.
Now for the grand finale. This is the real aha moment. I'm going to show you a classic problem that used to trip up even seasoned developers for years. This one example makes it crystal clear why moving from var to let was such a massive improvement. So here's the setup. It looks innocent enough, right? A simple for loop using our old friend var. Inside that loop, we're setting a timer to log the value of our counter, j, just 100 milliseconds later. We'll do that 3 times, for j equals 0, 1, and 2. So take a second and make a prediction. What do you think this is going to print? I mean, logic would say it's going to print 0, then 1, then 2. But we're using var, and we know var has that leaky scope. So how does that play into things, especially with that time delay? And the result is 3. It prints the number 3 times in a row. What? This is it. This is the aha moment. By the time those timeout functions actually get a chance to run, the for loop is long gone. It's already finished. And that single, shared j variable that all 3 functions are looking at has its final value, which is 3. Now, watch the magic. We are running the exact same code. The only thing we're changing is that 3-letter word var to let. That's it. Let's see what happens now. And boom, just like that, 0, 1, 2. The correct expected result. Because let is block scoped, every single time the loop runs, JavaScript creates a brand new I variable for that one iteration. So each timeout function gets its own private copy of I, frozen in time with the correct value. Problem solved. It's beautiful. So after seeing all that, what is the simple, golden rule for modern JavaScript? It's this. Start by declaring everything with const. Make that your default. Then, if and only if you realize you have a variable that needs to change its value later on, like a loop counter, then you can go back and change it to let. And as for var, in any new code you write, it's best to just pretend it doesn't exist. And that's really the key. This isn't just about memorizing some arbitrary rules. It's about understanding why these newer tools were created. Now you know the story, so the next time you're looking at some old code or starting a new project, you have the knowledge to write code that's more predictable, less buggy, and way easier to understand. The only question is, what are you going to build with it?